and already pretty well attended. So today's session of how MARC can SPARQL is being led by Kirk. Sorry, how MARC can SPARQL by Kirk Hess, and Kirk's focus is on data science, metadata research, and moving MARC from linked data. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to hold the questions till the end of the presentation. And thanks everyone for joining. I'll hand it over to Kirk.
Okay. You hear me okay? I'm going to share my presentation here. So far, so good. All right, so everything look good, Matt?
Yep, we can all see everything. It's good.
All right, so this is my presentation on how MARC can SPARQL. OCLC has done a lot of work on linked data over the years. Somewhere in the middle, this idea came up that what if we just simply convert MARC XML to a RDF ontology? But through time, it kind of got shelved. Jeff Young, one of our colleagues who just retired at the beginning of the year, kind of picked this up again and got it to work with the WorldCat data that we have. And then he, of course, unfortunately for us, retired, and then I've been working on it for the past few months. So we know we can turn MARC into linked data, obviously BibFrame, but there's other ways to do it, whether you're doing it in RDA, RDF, or you can schema. There's some projects to actually convert BibFrame to schema and vice versa. But what I'm going to talk about is this kind of more low-level MARC RDF. Essentially what we're doing is we're actually using OCLC CDF, Common Data Format, XML, as part of this project. We use that to convert back and forth to MARC. It has a few extra fields there. And then we have these namespaces that I'm just going to kind of go over to kind of the brief kind of example of how it works. So the leader becomes this kind of miscellaneous leader, just has strings. A lot of the fixed fields have this kind of idea where you just have kind of a value that's there. CDF has a material type, kind of matches the OA coded materials is there too. So we can break them down. There's actually the idea you could kind of, because the offsets are actually somewhat important in certain cases, so you can have an offset as well. The fields are turned into tags. Tags could just be a value, but oftentimes they're actually kind of a resource that has a lot more information. And then I'm going to talk about some of those things, as well as just kind of the contents of the field. So codes are important in subfields, important in MARC. So this is how they kind of get converted. We've got indicators. Those are kind of turned into resources that we can use. And how we did this is done in a few different ways. Essentially, it's a style sheet that converts MARC XML into, or CDF XML into MARC RDF XML, and used a Jupyter notebook and Python, and we used Spark to parallelize it. And we have a lot of our WorldCat data in the data warehouse software called Snowflake. So it kind of holds all this giant amount of data we have. So I was just going to kind of go over the process real quick. You connect to Spark, Snowflake, you do a query to actually get the data into pandas, and then I wrote a Lambda to convert it using this style sheet into a data frame. So this is kind of a brief example of the code. You can see I'm just using Saxon to do the style sheet processing. Here this is the actual Lambda function. And it's surprisingly fast when we've got something parallel behind it. This is kind of what it looks like. So the CDF document, and then we add a column that has the MARC RDF. And then from there, to analyze it, pushed it into a Blaze graph triple store. Kind of focuses. I've focused a lot of the current research on serials. I'm working on this for other projects already, so I have a lot of questions about it, and I'll kind of go over some of the kind of things that I thought about looking at it. There's lots of relationships, and they're relatively complex. And as I mentioned, I used a Docker container in AWS to load the triples. So here's kind of some of the flow. These are kind of things I thought about that maybe we'd be interested in. There's lots of connections in 780s and 785s between serials. So how does that work? So basically, this SPARQL query kind of goes through and kind of lists the title and then the basically the predecessors and successors. And what's interesting is it's counting connections. So the this particular newspaper has a lot of edges. I don't know why exactly this one versus the other ones, but you can see that actually the most is 17, which is also kind of interesting. So a lot of times there's only one, but serials can have very complicated graphs of related works. So this is kind of something you could focus on saying, what's there. This one it's a really wide query and it's hard to put in PowerPoint, so I kind of split it between two slides. So this is it's kind of its related item. Okay, so another problem is that a lot of times about a related serial, but you don't actually know the identifier. It's not been cataloged by Concert or ISSN, but you know about it. So the idea with Concert and the kind of cooperative cataloging is they're going to go through and maybe in the future someone's going to add it. But these exist out there. And so you can see there's a lot of these there. I mean, this is something to focus on, saying, okay, well, this one perhaps exists somewhere and I could maybe update this record, find the O1, go into connection and Concert, find it, update it, that kind of thing. And this is just an unordered list. I mean, we could probably kind of figure out a way to order this by making a more complicated query. So this is another way we could kind of improve things and kind of find areas to improve. A lot of these are kind of, these analysis are just kind of thinking about how can we find information and improve the quality. So another kind of riff off that is how many ones have the most successors. So this query kind of does that. And I don't know why this particular Wild Bird Center is cataloged this way, but it has a lot of newsletters, but they're all been cataloged individually by like the store essentially. So it's kind of an odd duck, I think, and it's so much more than the other ones. It's all by the camera. Well, got cut off, but that's kind of how it works. And then they have the same thing with these government serials, kind of by county, which actually makes more sense, or by country. So let's talk about something kind of different. So FAST, OCLC, we've kind of created a way to facet subject LCSH subject headings. So a lot of times we're trying to kind of, FAST is kind of a way to kind of think about, because it's specific, you can kind of think about how maybe your collection is kind of oriented. So in this case, we've got serials. What's the most popular subject for serials? And it's kind of easy to do with FAST using this query. So, so I don't know what I would expect, but economic history was not the one I thought would be top, honestly. So in fact, this whole list I think is very interesting. Maybe the number 7, lots of government serials. So kind of makes sense, something like that. But anyways. Another thing I'm interested in a lot of cases that, well, there are a lot of controlled information that is put into MARC. There's a lot of like repeated information, which is not controlled. So this is an example. So the various $I's that are in 700s, usually it's like repeated, it's the same information, but because it's not actually controlled, and in a linked data world, we might use like a URI, so it'd be the chance of user error is low, but with just typing it in and not using a macro, some errors can crop in. So I think it's kind of interesting that you see that, yeah, online version, and of course the convention of having a colon, because this is kind of created as a statement, is there, and then print version and some films. That makes sense. But then you kind of look down here, print version, and then different punctuation, some spacing, there's various alsos. I mean, a lot of these could be created into some kind of vocabulary. So if we're looking for a vocabulary like for BibFrame to kind of track this is something we can start with, because you can see it's very repetitive. I mean, this is like 1.5 million records or something that are in the serials data set. So it's a lot. So I was talking with some other people today about $300 B, and it's not really applicable in serials, although there are lots of illustrations it's actually used. But another thing is 310A. So what we have here is that basically there's the frequency that's tracked, and this query kind of goes through and says, okay, well, what's the frequency? What's the most popular frequency for a serial? And for some reason, I also would not have guessed annual, but I thought monthly probably would have been more, but those are there. So didn't really show it here, but I was kind of playing around with it in the break. And another thing we can do is you can say, okay, let's say we've got a frequency annual. Well, there's a fixed field, 08, 18, that's supposed to actually have the code, because 310 is kind of describing it, because you can have, it doesn't appear as a frequency, but sometimes it's annual except, on leap years or something, so there's some description that kind of indicates that the more specific, but it would be coded as annual. So you can see that it kind of tracks the same way, but you can actually find problems. Like a lot of times there's annual frequency, but then there's no attempt to code in the fixed field, which is probably wrong. It probably could be fixed, because I mean, it's something you could do, and it's probably programmatic. You can do this query, get this information, and fix it. So I found like, I don't know, it was like 7,000 ones that were not in there, we could be fixed. So I'll tell my data quality coworkers, and they can probably fix that. Okay, so changing gears a little bit. So that's a lot about, I mean, basically quality is what I was looking at. But you can actually use this for a lot of other purposes. Hubs are something that have been added to the BibFrame ontology recently, kind of as like a synonym for WEMI work, or a kind of a work expression that's kind of above what we'd see at the record level. But a lot of times we run into some issues where we don't have like the right specificity for MARC for certain things. And so we can kind of use this to like make BibFrame work a little better. So we're using other ontologies. So a few examples of that. So here's the ISSNL that's in there. And here we've generated a hub from MARC directly. That's using a construct in SPARQL. Back to frequency. We've got notes. So BibFrame uses this kind of note structure here. But a lot of times, perhaps we're really just talking about specific MARC tags. Like the BibFrame may not be actually as useful as just using the tags that are in MARC. And so you can actually replace them. And then you just notice that it's a little bit less blank node-ish, because it's more abbreviated. And so it's one way to kind of mix the two. When 588s are converted in MARC, BibFrame, it uses kind of this looking for labels. So we're converting from bitframe to MARC, sorry. And it looks for this and then creates a number because it's actually going to the indicator. But as I kind of, at the very beginning, kind of went quickly over indicators. Well, you can also just simply have an indicator URI there. And you could just use that. And then it's very specific. It's not trying to look for a text string. It's actually just matching exactly to something. So you're exactly saying, you're saying basically the indicator on this bitframe resource is 0. I mean, it's more specific. Last little bit is that Jeff kept working on this after he retired. He kind of created kind of something that I think the audience is going to be more useful to them. It's actually just MARC. So it's not CDF, which is it's more specific to OCLC. So you can go to this URL, and then there's kind of an ontology that's kind of goes along with it. It's a little different than the one I'm using, but it's essentially the same idea with the tags and various fixed things. So, and with that, that's the end. So. And I think I don't know if we're going to do questions. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have one in the chat, but it's a little vague. Yes, how do you define your data set for serial? So I'm not sure what they mean by that. So maybe the person could elaborate a bit more.
The Library of Congress has, if Jeff put it in that last thing. So if you look at this, go to that SPARQL or whatever it's called, the GitHub repo. There's an example. One of the examples is going out to the Library of Congress's data sets. And then there they just have serials in a zip file, all the serials for a certain year, like 2019. You can go there, get them. For us, I just did, I mentioned it kind of in the middle, doing a query in Snowflake. So I've got a query that selects all the records for Concert, which is essentially looking at authenticated records with certain values that are essentially PCC records, but there's a few other things. Off the top of my head, I can't remember all the choices. So it's a good question. Thanks, Jim. Bring that into the chat.
So with this project, I'm sort of curious. So it seems like data cleanup sort of the biggest issue. So I don't know. I mean, having this on a broader scale, I mean, it's not like something you could just automate for an entire collection to be sort of SPARQLed. But have you sort of tried to see how well this would work on like a large collection?
What do you mean by a large collection?
Well,
it's a pretty
sorry,
large collection.
Sorry, sure. I just mean like if like the uses for it, like beyond a test case, like is this something you've just used like test data with, or have you used it like in a library with library staff or?
We haven't. Although occasionally when I've done these things, I've actually talked to people and said, I noticed some problem and they've fixed it. So I think it's, there's always a lot of work around improving quality in libraries. And so this is just something you could probably use to kind of find these things that are difficult to find in like traditional ILS discovery system. Another thing I should mention is that even with WorldCat, not everything is indexed. So just to pick on the 588 again, that's not an indexed information, but maybe you want to find that, you know. There was a linked data pilot that happened and they used the 588 to kind of indicate which records have the 588, but it's not there. I can do it in Snowflake, but Snowflake's a pretty, you know, hefty, expensive system that probably not everyone has access to, whereas this is kind of demonstrating using a lot of free software, essentially. So something that probably takes a, you know, an intermediate amount of knowledge on how to use linked data, but in terms of like getting it working, it's not that difficult. It could work on a laptop for most things. And like I said, that, you know, yeah, maybe you don't want to do it on 20 million MARC records, but it's not that hard to split MARC records up by the OA type, and then you can kind of focus on, your serial collection, or you can also focus on, and there's other ways to do it. I mean, it kind of could go hand in hand with things that do that kind of work. It's a good question. So kind of just started on, I was just kind of saying, these are some ideas. I don't know. We'll see.
Abigail Sparling has a question. I worked with her at the CBC, actually. Small world. She says, really appreciates their focus on serial data. You're looking at the 780 and 785 fields. Is there particular instances of fields where you're able to use IDs to trace the title history? Serials do change their titles all the time, so this can be an issue. Is that something you dealt with?
We didn't. That's a good question. It's kind of, I would say a couple things. More generally, this is the kind of question that it was more of just a first level between the two. So saying that here's a record, and it's got two 780s, and they did have identifiers, and so just looked and said, oh, can I find those in the data set? So possibly you want to be more than just a title, essentially. So yeah, I know the problem, but I don't think it's. I'm not going to flip back to it, but it's not as. It probably could be a little bit more nuanced. There's a lot we can do with relationships and serials with something like this. So that's one of the things that linked data is going to make. I think it's going to be very revolutionary. And the title history. Titles change, but we know that there's this graph of related things. So can we actually show that?
Right. So I've worked with OCLC data in the past, and there were issues with certain fields that weren't clean, like a reclamation project, something I worked on. Have you guys tried to use this SPARQL process to sort of link issues with data sets in like the reclamation process?
No, we haven't done this for anything. So see, that's another.
Right.
There's lots of different kinds of things like that, where you're just, you're trying to improve your collection, improve your data, also manage your data, manage your collection. So. Oh, thanks. Okay, well.
There are no other questions in the Q&A. Thanks for your presentation today. Everyone's sort of very interested in this project. I guess we will follow up with those GitHub links, and we can maybe continue conversation in Slack.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Thanks.
Bye.